Hello everyone, this is Shriya,
Hi everyone, this is Sukanya.
and we are back with yet another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style Season 3, brought to you by Feminism in India.
So this episode, again, this season of the podcast has been about gender and the workplace and about unstereotyping women in different workplaces. When we talk about workplaces, we have different kinds of workplaces. Some of them allow us some sort of privacy. They let us be because we're not in the limelight. We can afford to be not in the public eye, etc. But being in a public eye and doing work and interacting with, daily issues, with governance, with justice, with people on a daily basis, it's not an easy feat. And now, if you put a woman into that picture, then it becomes a much more complicated, much difficult space where there's constant attention, there's constant judgment, there's constant sense of accountability, and all of this is public. And we all know that women in the public eye and women in public spaces have their own challenges because of their gender and how they work. Everything is scrutinized, and there's a lot of double accountability and double burden to prove themselves, etc. This is what we know, and this is what we've seen about women in public spaces, especially a place like politics. So what does it feel like to be, a politician or somebody who deals with people's issues, somebody who's accountable to people, and to be in the public eye, to be scrutinized, and to also be a woman? How complicated is it, or how fun is it? How do they do it? We will figure out today.
This is a very special episode because not just are we talking with someone who is a politician, who's someone who is working within the government, but also someone who's been very primary to a huge change that has recently come out on the 21st of February. Seattle became one of the first cities in the US to explicitly ban discrimination on the basis of caste after an ordinance was passed by the city council. The ordinance was introduced by council member Kshama Sawant. So today our guest is the wonderful Kshama. Kshama grew up in Mumbai, moved to the US and completed her Ph.D. in economics from the North Carolina State University. She's the member of the Socialist Alternative, the first and the only member of the party to be elected into public office. She's also been a council member since 2014. She's also played a huge role in the historic change in the minimum wage law in the city. We're so happy and honored to have you with us, Kshama.
Thanks so much for having me.
So let's just delve right into the conversation. So I would want to begin by asking you could you tell us a little bit about your career as a politician? Is this something that you've always wanted to do? And it's also a field that is all, in our public perception, looked upon as a specific area that is assigned to men. It's looked upon as a man's arena. So how did you come to a decision of wanting to venture into that space? And how was it for you? Was it hard? Was it fun? Just want to know a little bit about your journey.
Thanks for asking that question, Sukanya. In some ways, and maybe in all ways, the story that I have to relate is going to be very different than the vast majority and maybe virtually all elected representatives. Is that I never came into elected office because I wanted to be a political figure, but instead I was very interested in politics and political work, and that's been something that's been on my mind for as long as I can remember. Even growing up as a child in India, it's fair to say I was consumed with the thinking about poverty and inequality and injustice and the various forms in which injustice also is manifested, including sexual violence and caste violence, in addition to the overall situation of poverty and misery. And so I was very preoccupied with thinking about these aspects of society and the world, and I was deeply dissatisfied with the responses that I got around me from people who were generally not political and in some cases very clearly didn't agree with me politically. And so, this idea that, people are poor because it's karma or it's past life or they don't work hard enough, which is the most absurd idea of all, because the poorest are working, often some of the hardest working people. And so when I came to the US, my journey for a political analysis continued, and that's what I was hungry for. And it's just a quirk of fate that I came all the way to the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, and ran into the organization named Socialist Alternative, which I joined in 2009, and I haven't looked back. The reason I mention all this is to explain that it was never my quest to have any specific position, let alone elected position, but I was always passionate about politics and political analysis. And in Socialist Alternative, we have a democratically organized group of people where for us, the idea of politics, or at least electoral politics, but in politics in general, is very different than, and in fundamental ways, very different than what we get from most political parties, where whether you talk about the Democratic and Republican Party in the United States or most of the political parties in India, we're talking about parties that are controlled by a powerful establishment that has its own ties to big business and the elite of society. And then the party itself is composed of elected officials who are making their own careers. They decide they want to run for office, and if they prove themselves useful enough to the establishment, to the status quo, then their careers get promoted. That is absolutely the antithesis of what Socialist Alternative stands for. We are an organization of social and economic justice activists, and we're socialists, we're Marxists. And so for us, the idea of running for office was something that was democratically discussed and debated in the organization. And coming out of the Occupy movement in 2011, maybe many of your listeners are too young to have been part of their experience, but I'm sure many of them have read about it. In 2011, there was the Occupy movement, and it was clear that millions of young people in the United States were disenchanted with the status quo around them, a system of crises and inequality, and were looking for an alternative. And so we ran a campaign in 2013 for the city council with the idea of sharing our ideas, our political analysis of and strategy for how to fight back, how to build an alternative to the corporate dominated politics. And inside Socialist Alternative, we debated and voted on not only the program of this campaign, should we run on $15 an hour minimum wage, tax the rich, that sort of thing, and also who the candidate should be. So in reality, it was not my personal choice. It was something that that our members agreed on and voted on. And to be honest with you, if it was left to me, I would never have chosen this path, because it comes with its own challenges, but it was a democratic decision, and that's very, very important. And the reason I'm emphasizing this point so much is that it is precisely for women and people of color in the United States, obviously in India, women, people in religious minorities, oppressed caste people, the idea of having our own political organizations which democratically organize organize and fight for our needs is so crucial, and is so absent, unfortunately.
It's very interesting, Kshama, that you mentioned, we say that politicians are the voice of the people, but very rare, the representation is from a certain class or a certain, elite group of people who are out there taking your issue. So how are they even going to speak for you when they do not have the lived experiences or not interacting so much with the ground reality? Taking from that, I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you are not a career politician. You happen to stumble into it, and you've been an activist. You've worked with social justice movements and organizations. So do you think, because as someone who's not been a career politician, has that somewhere hindered? Has there been times when your points have not been taken seriously, or what you're saying has not been given the same weight because there's a certain image, of activists a certain certain way, or they're always out there, always shouting, talking, they always have to present their thoughts a certain way? Has that ever hindered your points being taken seriously?
Yeah, absolutely, Shriya. In fact, when we first ran for office, and notice I'm saying we and not I, because I'm trying to emphasize that you cannot actually, in any honest way, fight for, let alone win victories for oppressed communities and for working people as a whole, unless you understand that this is not about you and or about promoting yourself or your career, but it's actually about the collective goals. But yes, when we first ran for office, the Democratic establishment, which is the party, and the reason I'm mentioning this for your listeners, this is the party that controls this city, and in fact, it's in Democratic parties in control of many metropolitan areas in the United States, like Seattle. They treated us, as you said, Shriya, out there, like who are these people? We've never seen them before, and they speak a language that nobody understands, and they try to portray us as something strange, and maybe even something that should be feared. But as a matter of fact, the way that ordinary people, working people, including large numbers of women, ordinary people, the way they responded to our campaign was very much in contrast to the way the elite responded. So, and there's a reason why, because, when we launched our campaign, I openly said, I am a socialist, I am a union member, I'm a rank and file union member, and I'm fighting for a $15 minimum wage in Seattle, to tax big business so that we can fund publicly owned affordable housing. And we need rent control because rent is skyrocketing. And in fact, if you look at the rates of homelessness, eviction, and housing instability, it affects so many working people, but it especially disproportionately affects women, and especially Black women. And so when we highlighted these issues, as a matter of fact, our activist background and us calling ourselves socialists, far from being an obstacle, really was welcomed by ordinary people, because for them it was a complete shift from what they see as politics on offer. I just wanted to share an anecdote with you. So when we were first campaigning in our early days in 2013, I remember standing at a table. So we're activists. We don't do gala dinners with $5,000 a plate kind of fundraisers. We do grassroots, rank and file led working people's fundraisers. And the way we get our word out also includes going door to door, literally knocking on people's doors and having conversations with them, and also setting up our political tables outside grocery stores, outside schools and universities, where we will meet working people face to face and talk to them. So I remember early on in 2013, when I was standing at a table with our campaign leaflet and saying, this is what we stand for. I'm a socialist. I am a union member. Will you stand with me? Because I am fighting for a $15 an hour minimum wage. 100,000 workers in Seattle are below the poverty line, and this wage will lift you all up. And if you support this, you should join our struggle, not just vote for us. I remember this woman, she was looking at me from a distance, and she was, really meeting her eyes to my eyes. And at first I thought she was going to be deeply hostile, because she was walking towards me with a real sense of purpose. But when she came up to our table, she looked right at me and said, "Are you for real?" And what she meant was, is this actually happening? Do we actually have a candidate who is going to stand up for the forgotten people, the ordinary people who are never remembered by the establishment? That's the kind of impact it had. And in fact, it really created fear in the minds of the establishment, and they went all out to try and defeat us. And of course, as you know, history has spoken loud and clear. We have never been defeated. We have won 4 elections, and on the same basis. We have never sold out. We never bought into this idea, that once you are elected, now it's down to business. Now you have to stop being an activist, now be a run-of-the-mill politician who joins the inside game. We never accepted that. And in fact, that's the only reason that we have been able to win the victories that we have been able to win.
Right, Kshama. Talking about speaking for people who the establishment has forgotten, let's also talk about your latest victory, where a caste in itself has been such a debated topic in India. And it's like we all know it exists, but then there are issues that nobody wants to talk about. Nobody wants to, a lot of times, factor caste into conversations. And the moment you say there is like a generalization, and there's a blanket dismissal a lot of times. So what about, what made you think of picking this issue of caste in the US? Can you talk a little bit about it? Because also as people who live in India and look at the West, we sometimes think that this is a problem that perhaps is this pervasive only in a place that we live in. We have very different ideas about how countries in the West work. So, being a person there, being a politician there, what made you feel, what made you identify this as a large issue, and what made you decide to sort of pick it and run with it in the forefront?
It might be surprising to a lot of your listeners in India that the caste system is pervasive in the United States, but it is. Obviously, it is not in the same, it does not manifest itself in exactly the same ways that it does in India and South Asia as a whole. Obviously, in India, we are actually seeing under the Modi regime and the atmosphere of right and the promotion of right populism and Hindu fundamentalism. In that context, we are seeing actually a ramping up of incidents of brutal caste violence. I don't think you would see exactly the same instances in the United States, but what we do see is that caste-based discrimination, especially in the workplace, is quite pervasive. We have statistical analysis that shows that, but also in addition to that, we have the testimonials of hundreds of oppressed caste workers, especially in the tech sector, who will tell you that caste discrimination is unfortunately very prevalent in every tech-based corporation. You name the corporation and it happens. Cisco, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, IBM, and Meta. And so it was clear. It's been clear that we need to do something about it. But for us to decide, for my office to decide that this is what we want to take it up, that actually came about really, in some sense, its roots are in a slightly different issue. 3 years ago, in January, February 2020, my office was in solidarity with, and Socialist Alternative, my organization, we were in solidarity with the protests that broke out here in Seattle against Narendra Modi's new citizenship laws at that time, CAA and RC citizenship laws, which, as most of your listeners will know, were anti-Muslim, anti-oppressed caste, anti-poor. I mean, they are called citizenship laws, but they are really were an attempt to strip masses of people from these oppressed communities of their citizenship. It was really a way of terrorizing entire communities. And so these protests were very important. And at that time, I put forward the idea that we need a resolution on the Seattle City Council condemning these CAA and RC laws and by the Modi regime, and urging US Congress to do the same. And so when we did that, there were hundreds and maybe even thousands of activists who supported us. And I'm talking about both South Asian working people who stood with us, across religion and across caste. Working people were overwhelmingly in solidarity with this resolution, as were American workers and union members. But we did have massive opposition from the Modi-aligned right wing. And in fact, it was a really important example of how you can only win against the right wing, against the Modi-aligned right wing or the Trump right wing, regardless of which country we're talking about. The right wing has certain features, and the only way we can overcome them and defeat them is if we don't act like their points have any legitimacy, but we expose them for what they are, which is the right wing, and which is promoting the oppression of various communities, no matter what they say. When the right wing spoke in opposition to our caste legislation, for example, our legislation banning caste discrimination, they said, oh, well, I am also against caste discrimination, but this legislation is not the way to go. So the way we responded to that, for example, was not to say, oh, if you're against caste legislation, caste discrimination, then maybe we should talk. No, we said that is a falsehood. If you are genuinely against caste discrimination, then how would you oppose a legislation that is banning caste discrimination? You're obviously being dishonest. So having the boldness to call them out for what they are was a very important political component of our strategy to defeat the right wing in 2020 when we were fighting for this resolution. the other component was understanding that the Democrats are not on our side. The city council has 9 council members. I am one socialist, and there are 8 Democrats. Democrats, unlike Republicans, are not outright, they're not openly right wing, but they are extremely pro big business. They share with the Republicans their overall Wall Street agenda and the agenda to not rock the boat. The Democrats are extremely reluctant at all times to go against the status quo. And at this moment, when the United States regime, when US imperialism is making overtures to the Modi regime, which has ruled now for 8 years, to build a bloc against China in the new Cold War, the Democratic Party wants no war, wants no battle with the Modi regime. And so the Democrats were also against us. So the only way to overcome both the Hindu right wing and the Democratic establishment was for us to build a powerful movement from below and expose both those entities, and in fact explain publicly that if any Democrat dared vote no on our resolution, it means that they are empowering the Modi right wing, whether they say that or not. And regardless of what their words are, by their vote, that is what they will be doing indeed, empowering the right wing. So it was through that kind of bold approach that we forced the Democrats to concede. And it was on the basis of that victory that the activist movement was beginning to grow. And in December of last year, we came together again and we all were in agreement that we want to win a powerful victory on the caste issue, because it was clearly gaining momentum. And it was also clear, as I said, from statistics, that it was becoming, caste discrimination was pervasive. And it was one of our members in Socialist Alternative, who is actually not South Asian, who suggested that, hey, why don't we actually push to ban caste discrimination? And then starting at that moment, we built a really powerful movement from below, getting support from unions, Alphabet Workers Union, for example, which represents Google workers, strongly supported our legislation. And we had oppressed caste organizations alongside dominant caste Hindus, and also Muslims and Sikhs and overall workers supporting us, aside from Socialist Alternative, obviously. And that is the basis on which we were able to win. And I should be clear, actually, this is the reason this is such a powerful victory is that it is the first ever, this legislation has made Seattle the first jurisdiction of any level outside South Asia to have banned caste discrimination. That's how powerful this is. That is why it has captured the imagination of millions of people around the world, including especially in India. And it has opened the floodgates for potential victories in the future. But I say potential because they are not automatic. Future victories can only be won if we use the kind of strategy that we used here to overcome both the establishment and the Hindu right wing.
Right, Kshama. It's very interesting that you mention, because I think a lot, like Sukanya said, and like you also mentioned, like while it might not be as pronounced, the caste discrimination, the biases might not be as pronounced in the US as it is in India, but like it's not like it doesn't exist. Like these biases are within the people who are also here and there. I just wanted to ask, like, it's a bit of a personal question, as you know, it might be your idea of caste discrimination, your you wanting to work with it, wanting to bring up this issue. Does growing up in Maharashtra have an effect on that? Because we all know, like, Maharashtra's caste understanding and the politics has been very, very pronounced within India. So growing up in Maharashtra, has that had an impact in your understanding, wanting to work with the issue of caste per se?
My memories from growing up certainly had a huge influence on me in terms of how I felt when we came up with this idea. It really spoke to me on a personal level, and you're absolutely right. Growing up, like many others around me, I observed the brutality of the caste system, and when we're not only talking about the outright incidents of violence and lynching, of course, obviously those are the most brutal and horrific, but even on a day-to-day basis, the idea of the caste system is so deeply embedded in people's living, in the language, in the way people interact, the way people view society itself. It's so embedded, and so it would be impossible not to notice. And I found it objectionable from the very beginning. And it was actually stunning also to see it happen here. I mean, see it come up here in the United States. I've seen it on even in social settings, social situations, where people will just casually make derogatory remarks about oppressed caste people. These are South Asians that we're talking about. And of course, as I said, we have statistical documentation of how working people in various situations. It's not just tech sector. It's just that I just happen to mention the tech sector because that's where there is a certain concentration of the South Asian immigrant community, and also because that's where we have most of the data from. But I'm quite positive that I'm quite confident that in the future, when more data research is done, we will know statistics from other sectors of industry as well. But as far as the tech sector is concerned, yeah, I mean, we've seen how people from oppressed caste communities face derogatory remarks on a daily basis, being excluded from meetings, even being denied raises and promotions, even though their performance merits it. So all of this has been part of our thinking about why this is important. And I'll also mention another really poignant aspect of this. In the Washington Post, there was an anonymous letter that was published recently, written by 30 women Dalit software engineers, in which they talked about the daily dose of indignities that they've been made to suffer because they are Dalit, because they are from oppressed castes, including up to and including sexual harassment. So we're talking about very serious situations that people are subjected to. One of the reasons we were able to be so effective in getting American worker support, non-South Asian worker support, is because we carried out a political education. We wrote a document, a frequently asked questions document, to explain what caste is in the first place for people who won't even know about it, but who would support us if they knew about it. So the way we explained was, if you marched in the Black Lives Matter movement because you want to live in a society free of racism, if you are against sexism, if you oppose oppression and discrimination in our society, then you should support us. And on that basis, we got thousands of people supporting us.
Right. In the context of the United States, Kshama, can you talk a little bit about like you were just talking about the daily indignities that were mentioned in a letter that was published recently by women. So, could you talk to us a little bit about the daily discrimination that marginalized caste individuals face in the country? Like, on the road to getting this legislation passed, how much was the involvement of those individuals on the ground, and what have your experiences been based on your exchanges with these people?
I think the involvement and the activism of oppressed caste individuals themselves, and also the organizations that represent them, has been absolutely critical. It was part of the backbone of winning the victory that we won. In fact, one of the most powerful things we saw during the month that we were fighting for this legislation was hundreds of Dalit workers, oppressed caste workers, speaking up courageously in public and giving public testimonials in City Hall, and about the situations that they have personally faced in the workplace and also in social situations. For example, one Dalit woman talked about her experience of being excluded from meetings, and also when she was at a colleague's or her manager's house. I believe, I can't remember exactly which one it was, but something that was association that was work related, but they were in a social setting, and in that context, somebody identifying her as a Dalit, and then for her to be told she has to use a separate bathroom. I mean, this is just I mean, on one level it seems unbelievable, but this is actually happening, and it is just scandalous. And I think the reason these publicly shared testimonials were so important is one is that just taking it away from the invisible to the visible, to the publicly discussed, that itself is an empowering act for those who are facing these situations in their personal lives and work lives. But it had an even more important component, which is that it it exposes the people who are the who are free to perpetuate caste discrimination, because they're not being exposed, because they are not being called out, because they're not being because nobody's pointing the finger at them and saying, shame on you for doing this. You call yourself enlightened, you call yourself progressive, and then you are you are discriminating against somebody in your workplace on the basis of caste. I mean, why would we respect you? So in other words, turning the tables on this on the way discrimination perpetuates itself, where the oppressed people are denied dignity and respect, turning that on its head and actually denying respect to the people who are the ones who perpetuated that was a very important reason why it was important that people spoke out about their personal experiences, and it was not just us talking about statistical analysis. Obviously, both are important, but I think bringing that to life in the personal experiences, that was really crucial. And I should also say that it took courage for the Dalit workers to speak out publicly, because they've always been afraid of reprisal, justly so. And that's also another reason why winning such victories is important, is because there's no way to fight against oppression or economic exploitation on an individual basis, because we're in the context of, we are in a capitalist economy, we are in a capitalist society globally. This is a society whose objective is to maximize the wealth and power in the hands of a very small elite at the top, and the rest of us are forced to fight over scraps. And so oppression is inevitable in a class-based society, because it is because of the mass of the working class needs to be divided in order for a small ruling class to rule over all of us, to keep us subjugated. And so taking that out of the realms of the personal experiences and showing an example of a collective struggle where working class people across caste are going to be together, that was very important. Similarly, the Black Lives Matter movement became the largest street protest movement in US history, precisely because people across race marched together. It was a multiracial movement. That is why it was a multiracial working class movement. That is why it became so powerful. That is how you got the numbers, 20 million people on the streets, because regardless of your race, people were out there saying, I want to live in a society free of racism, regardless of what skin color I am.
It's very interesting that you mentioned, Kshama, that oppression is sort of inevitable. This is how our society is structured, that we continue to fight, but there's that entire cycle that keeps going on, and we as individuals, as members of the civil society members, as politicians, as activists, we need to take up that fight again and again. But the very base structure is such that there are a certain number of powerful people who are always going to try to make things work on their way. And when you say that, be it the US, be it India, be it any country for that matter, we can pick any country, the minority communities, the minority genders, the minority caste, class, everybody faces the problems, the oppressions, the issues, and go through it a lot of times not talking about it. So in this context, being a South Asian person, being someone from a minority community in a majorly white country like the US, to initiate such kind of socio-cultural changes as a politician, have you ever faced the fear of that pushback because of the fact that you come from the minority community, because of the fact that the color of your skin is not white? Have you felt that sort of pushback, the fear of it? Have you reconsidered your stances, what you want to say? how you want to put it through because of a threat to your life or to the threat or a threat to someone dear to you. Has that ever happened in your career?
Thanks for asking that, Shriya. Certainly, we have our office, and me personally, we've had our share of this kind of pushback, especially the attacks from the right wing. So, from the very beginning, even from the moment that I first took office as an open socialist, it's that itself, the way we ran our election campaign in 2013, the way we were able to win against a powerful 16-year Democratic Party incumbent, all of that itself was a fight. It was not your run of the mill election race where everybody is being nice to each other but nobody is being nice to the working class. It's all people in power are being nice to each other and it's completely uncontroversial. It was not like that at all. It was a very clear situation of working class people fighting against the ruling class. And so in that context, it was not surprising that there were specifically attacks against me on the basis of my gender, being a woman or being a person of color or being an immigrant, and many racial slurs, all of that from the right wing. But as I said, it's really a fringe that was carrying out these attacks. The vast majority of people, even if it would be unfamiliar to them to have somebody from India with a different accent speaking in the election year. And that's why I'm trying to emphasize how the only way in which there is any solution for people who are marginalized is for us to combine the fight against specific oppressions to the fight against economic exploitation, because there are so many people in Seattle who are white but are suffering because they are barely able to keep up with rent and food. The cost of living crisis is affecting everyone across the board. And so when we fought for $15 an hour minimum wage, for example, we obviously talked about how winning the $15 minimum wage would lift, as I said, 100,000 workers out of poverty. And it would disproportionately affect, in a good way, Black and brown working people. But we combined that with the understanding that it would help all working class people lift themselves out of poverty. And so I think if we don't build a sort of a joint fight back against oppression and economic exploitation, we are going to fail to win victories on any front, whether it is economic or against oppression, because both are phenomena that come from class society. And I wouldn't say oppression is inevitable in general in human society, but oppression is inevitable in a class-based society. So caste, for example, came about not because human beings are evil in general, but because class-based systems are evil. And so the ruling classes of that time, in the feudal era, 2000 years ago, they are the ones who really manufactured the caste system in order to subjugate the masses. And of course, that meant that the people who are the most oppressed are the most subjugated. They are the ones who have to suffer the most indignities and be the sub-target of the worst kind of violence. But ultimately, it is a corrosive system as a whole. And so we have used that kind of approach to build the widest possible unity. And that's why the attacks of the kind that you're talking about are really from people who are obviously right wing. That's and actually there's a counter story to all of this, or rather another dimension to this story, which is that the biggest attacks that my office and I have faced actually are from the Democrats themselves, and many of them are women. And that's where the question of class and class allegiances and which side you're on really matters, because you can be a woman, but as long as you are representing the interests of the ruling class, you are ultimately not on the side of women or on the side of working people as a whole. I mean, look at Hillary Clinton. The reason the majority of voters rejected her is not because she's a woman. Obviously, there was sexism. I wouldn't say that there wasn't there at all. Obviously, there was. And there is sexism and racism. It is a very real sexism and racism and caste oppression are very real. They're all too real. But my point is that the reason Hillary Clinton lost her election to Donald Trump is because she is so clearly on the side of corporations that nobody really believed that she would represent them. Millions of working people didn't believe that she was going to represent their interests. And unfortunately, in the absence of any real working class alternative that could mobilize both on the issues of oppression and on the issues of economic justice, unfortunately, Donald Trump, who is a con man, he's a billionaire con man, was able to pose himself as somebody who stood up for white people. And in fact, there were people of color who voted for him also. Although the vast majority of people of color and the majority of working people support progressive issues like Medicare for all and raising the minimum wage. And in 2019, when I was running for re-election, my second re-election campaign, in fact, two of the Latina council members, women council members, women of color council members in Seattle, they ran a candidate against me. See, this really is a real life example of how ultimately class interests will trump whatever outward appearance there might be of a given leader. So these two leaders, they constantly talk about themselves being women and women of color and immigrant community and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, they don't represent the interests of immigrants or women or people of color. They represent the interest of big business. And it was on that basis that they ran a candidate against me. And so that really exposed to people that if we really want to stand up for women, what is the kind of leadership that we need?
Right, Kshama, like just taking on from what you said, do you sometimes feel being from an organization who that is not sort of they're out there for mainstream visibility? We know the Republicans, we know the Democrats, but a lot of us do not know about I would say there's lack of awareness about socialist politics in general in most countries. So sometimes, do you think this fight becomes lonely for you? Do you ever feel like, we're doing it, but at the end of the day, there are these people, these big names, these people from big parties with these bigger sort of capitalistic interests who hog the limelight and take this thing. So do you think it feels like lonely to you at any point? Has it happened?
Thanks so much for asking that, Shriya. It is hard work, and it can sometimes get lonely. It is important that people hear that from me personally, because it's not. I would never. Fighting for social justice is not a walk in the park. That's for sure. But like you said, we often get invisibilized in the corporate media. I mean, the New York Times and the Washington Post are not asking the questions that you and Sukanya are asking me. That's not a coincidence, because they represent the interests of the capitalist elite, as you correctly said. And that's why these kinds of podcasts like yours, the interview that you're doing, this is so crucial, because this helps us share our message and our analysis of how to fight and how to win with a lot of young people who I know are listening, who are hungry for a fight back, are looking for a strategy. In fact, that is what is missing, and that's the part that makes it less lonely, in the sense that it's a reminder for us that that what there isn't a shortage of is the number of young people who are looking for a way to fight. There's no shortage of that in this day and age. Today, we are living in a period where consciousness globally, not just in the US, but globally, is shifting to the left. What's missing, unfortunately, is the kind of leadership that we need. And you're right. And the reason there is a lack of awareness of what socialism is, and also how to fight against oppression, how to fight against the fact that workers, work so hard, and yet they are now dealing with the cost of living crisis, not to mention a possible recession that is coming in the near future. How do you deal with all of this? none of this is addressed in what people hear for the most part, and that is why that is absolutely a challenge. um, but the first step in overcoming it is to recognize that the challenge is not people wanting to fight back. The challenge is that we don't have the leadership on offer, and that's why rather than running for re-election again, I don't know if you've heard, but we are launching, we are in the process of launching an organization, a nationwide movement called Workers Strike Back. We've already had a launch in Seattle and a couple of other cities like Boston. New York City will be having its launch very soon. The reason we are launching Workers Strike Back as a nationwide movement is precisely the question that you asked, which is how do we share this message with a wider majority of young people and working people who we know will agree with us and will want to fight alongside us. That's why we are launching Workers Strike Back, and Workers Strike Back is movement to fight for a $25 an hour minimum wage, for living wage jobs, for good union jobs, also to fight against oppression and discrimination. In fact, Workers Strike Back had a profile in this fight for the caste discrimination ban in Seattle as well. And also we are calling for a new party for working people. And all of this ties into what you just asked, because the as you correctly said in your question, the ruling class is not going to popularize our ideas. In fact, they are going to demonize them. We have to be prepared for that. We can't have any illusions on them. And so we have to build our own forces. That includes building a nationwide organization like Workers Strike Back, but it also, quite frankly, includes independent media like yours.
Right. Talking about young people and how they look up to joining spaces like yours, and talking about their daily marginalizations and intersectionalities, what is that one message that you may have for early career individuals, young women, queer individuals, people of color who are apprehensive to walk this road of politics, fearing, maybe backlash or exposure to public eye, or, too much scrutiny, etc. There may be so many apprehensions, and especially in young minds, especially also now that there's a lot of the digital environment around us is so pervasive, etc. So what would be one message if you had to like quickly just talk to them? How do you think they can navigate the fears and the dilemmas in their heads?
I would say that the best way, and really the only way, that you can be effective in political work and also push back against the inevitable attacks that young women and queer individuals or people of color in the US context, or oppressed caste people in the Indian context will face, that is going to be inevitable, is to actually have your own political organization like Socialist Alternative, which is able to have the reason Socialist Alternative is so effective is because we are not just an organization that agitates on issues and wins victories, which obviously we clearly have an analysis and a fighting strategy that has proven successful time and time again over the last decade. But the reason we are so successful is also because we have an intellectual basis to our organization, and we have an overall political analysis, and I would call that a Marxist analysis, which explains that the real fight is against the capitalist system itself, and the way you fight is to bring people together who are oppressed or marginalized, but maybe in different ways. And the way you build their power is to fight collectively on issues. And having this kind of organization has two benefits. One is that it is, as I said, it makes you intellectually grounded in understanding why things happen the way they happen, which is, I cannot describe to you how crucial that is, because otherwise there is a danger of sort of personalizing these attacks and thinking it's all about you, and then ultimately getting demoralized and getting politically inactive, or politically or even staying active but then selling out, because you think that the only way you personally can survive is by selling out to the establishment, which is unfortunately all too common a story. And then you end up becoming an enemy of the people that you said you started out to represent. So, you have to avoid the pitfalls both of becoming marginalized or becoming demoralized on the one hand, or staying in politics but then selling out, which we have, as I've said, I've already given you examples of people who have sold out, even though they're women and people of color, doesn't mean that they represent the interests of women and people of color. And so the only way you can withstand all of this is to have an organization that is rooted in a clear intellectual and class analysis. I would say you need a class analysis for this. And the second reason why an organization like Socialist Alternative has been so crucial in the work that I have done, or the work that people see me doing, is that you are never alone. Shriya, you asked me earlier about, does it feel lonely? Yes, it is hard work, but I never feel lonely in that sense, in the sense that I am part of an organization that is fully with me, in solidarity with me, and I am with them, and that the organization itself is rooted in the wider community of working class people and in the issues that are faced by marginalized communities. So it's no coincidence, in fact, for example, that Socialist Alternative and I were the only political organization / candidate, or candidate who were running for election, who was willing to stand with the first ever trans pride that happened in Seattle. And it happened in 2013 when we were running for our first campaign for city council. Not a single Democratic candidate was willing to stand with them. A lot of LGBTQ figures, public figures, were not willing to stand with trans pride because they didn't want to rock the boat. So that's a concrete example of how having a really clear class analysis of oppression is I would say an indispensable asset in learning how to navigate politics. I'll give you another example. Sorry, this is not exactly a short answer. You wanted a short answer, but I think this might be useful. Is when we were almost about to win in 2013, the election hadn't ended yet, but the campaign hadn't ended yet, but it was clear we were inching towards victory despite being the complete underdog. As I said, we ran against a powerful incumbent. When it was clear that we might really win, and this was serious, the Democratic establishment launched an attack against me, very personalized, very misogynist. They published an article in which it had nothing to do with politics, and there was no real expose they could do, because I haven't done anything like that. But they merely tried to smear me on a personal basis by talking about my former marriage and my former partner, and making me seem, trying to discredit me, but they didn't really have anything to discredit me with, because I'm, openly fighting for workers. I don't have a two-faced message. So they couldn't attack me in any way politically. So they launched a completely unwarranted attack, simply talking about the fact that I was married to someone else and all that. It was a really bad attack. And by the way, that article was written by a woman. So this, again, it's another, you have example after example of how, if we are fighting for women, we need the right kind of fighters. We cannot go on the basis of whether their gender is female or not. It's a question of not their gender, but which side they're on. And the way we fought back against this attack, see, I could easily have made it about myself and said, oh, they're attacking me. Instead, what we said in our public response, we published an article in response to this. We said, the fact that they are attacking me in this way proves that they have no they have no solidarity with working people, and that they have no response. We have been fighting for $15 an hour. They oppose it, but they won't come out and say they oppose it. They don't support it either. And so instead, they are attempting to keep us from winning the election by attacking my personal life. And that, this is what working people face. And we also said, this is what women face when they run for office. They are attacked in their personal lives, and we are not going to stand for this. And that is exactly why people should vote for us. And a few days later, we won the election.
No, I was just listening to everything that you were saying, and about Just that we've come to the end of this podcast, and I couldn't help but think how similar it is when women are in politics and in the public sphere. The first thing that's used against every woman to bring her down is character assassination and moral policing, and we see that happen every day. And to also have a woman, an Indian woman in a country like the United States speak about how the same thing happened to her there. I was just thinking about the universality of that experience and how we treat women in the public sphere. So it's been great listening to you, Kshama. It's been wonderful that we're very grateful that you took out some time from your schedule's absolutely busy. There's a lot of claim on your time. We're very, very happy and very grateful that you gave us some time and spoke to us about your experiences. We are very, as Indians and as women, we're very proud of the work that you do, and we hope that you continue and you get to do everything that you've set out to do. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Thanks so much, Shriya, Sukanya. I really appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you. It was a real pleasure. Please keep in touch. And I agree with you, the struggle against misogyny, caste oppression, and really every type of oppression is truly international.
Truly, Kshama, like I think that one line that I'm going to take away from it is don't be scared to rock the boat, because most people are scared to rock that boat. So we need to, because that's the only thing that can bring about the change. So like I'm going to write that line down somewhere and remember it always. Thank you so much for talking to us today. And all the very best for your for the work that you're doing, and more power to you.
Thank you. And likewise, wish you best of luck with your work, both of you.
That's all, everyone. We'll be back with yet another episode of Intersectional Feminism Desi Style Season 3. Stay tuned and stay safe.